In the entirety of the Eminence and Shadow series, there is one character that I consider to show the most character growth. More than the main character Sid, more than his sister Claire, and even more than Rose. And that character is Alexia Midgar, the second princess to the Midgar Kingdom. Now, when she was first introduced into the series, I didn't really think that much about her. I figured she'd play a big role in possibly an arc or two, and that'd be the end of it. I definitely didn't expect her to become one of my favorite characters in the entire series. You see, my expectations for her were actually quite low. I kind of figured that she'd just end up being some sort of tsundere love interest and nothing more. However, I was wrong about Alexia. I was very wrong about Alexia. And she's since become one of my favorite characters, and what I consider to be one of the best written characters as well. When we first meet her, she comes across as a bit of a bratty princess that is just using Sid to get out of an arranged marriage. Of course, Sid is also using her to fund his Eminence and Shadow hobby, but neither of these characters come off as being kind towards each other. However, the one redeeming quality of their relationship is that it's at least genuine. Genuinely shitty, but genuine nonetheless. Now, after we get to learn more about her through their sparring during class and their later discussions on the train, we get to learn some of Alexia's shortcomings. Some things that most students don't really realize about her. You see, while most students see her as a beautiful princess that must have everything figured out, she's actually quite mentally unstable when we first meet her. She's very self-conscious and feels like she lacks quite a bit compared to her sister Iris, somebody who is considered to be the strongest Dark Knight in the entire Midgar Kingdom and considered by many to be objectively one of the strongest knights in the world. While dueling in their class, Sid describes Alexia's fencing style as orthodox, meaning there isn't necessarily anything special about it. And while discussing things with Alexia after sparring, they talk about how people refer to her as the Fencer Ordinaire, a title that seems to compare her to her sister and makes her feel even worse about the distance between her mediocre swordplay versus her sister's genius. During this conversation, Alexia says that she hates Sid's fencing style because it reminds her of her own. Now, in response to that, Sid says that he actually likes her swordplay, but that doesn't end up making her feel any better. In fact, it only makes her feel worse. She mentions that her sister is the only other person to have ever said that to her, but even though Iris was being genuine at the time, Alexia felt like it was almost mocking her since she had just suffered an embarrassing defeat. After this conversation, Alexia leaves and it's implied that she's breaking off the relationship that the two had. This ends up being the last anybody sees of Alexia for a while, as she ends up going missing. Now, we get the sense from these scenes that Alexia is a lot more troubled than she lets on. Her kind and well put together persona that she shows the vast majority of people is just a facade. And even while she began to show more of her true colors towards Sid with her more uppity and self-righteous attitude, she still wasn't being completely honest. It's not until we see them discuss fencing and her shortcomings of it that we actually begin to see the true Alexia. The Alexia that worked her ass off in order to get into the top class at the academy. The Alexia that, although being a princess, has experienced lots of scrutiny. The Alexia that has to hide everything she thinks and feels in order to live up to a standard that she herself doesn't believe she's capable of. It's at this moment that we get to see a much more relatable character that isn't just here for comic relief or some romantic interest. There's so much more depth to her that we didn't really expect. We now see her as somebody who has struggles that she's constantly trying to overcome. She's someone who's built up multiple layers of defenses so that nobody can find out about her true feelings. And now that somebody has learned about them, she feels like she has to leave them, because her embarrassment is just too much to bear. Now, the next time we see Alexia is while she is being held captive by the Cult of Diablos. And in this scene, she's obviously very confused about what's going on, but also seems to be almost unconcerned. Now, depending on which version of the series you're experiencing, it could be implied that she's unconcerned because she's confident that the Night Order will come rescue her. But if you're watching the anime, it almost feels a lot darker. In the anime, it almost feels like she's unconcerned with her safety because she's delirious. But also, it feels like she's resigned to her fate. as if she's accepted the torture of being drained of her blood nonstop, or until they no longer need her and decide to dispose of her. It's as if she's given up, because perhaps she feels like she'll never become what people expect of her. She'll always be mediocre and will never surpass the genius levels that talent can give you. Of course, when given the opportunity to escape later, she does at least attempt to get out of there, but she's quickly found by Xenon, a now revealed cult member who is trying to take the open 12th seat of the Knights of Rounds. Alexia and Xenon fight and she's pretty handedly defeated, though he is surprised by a few new techniques she seemed to pick up from Iris. It's at this moment that Shadow shows up and begins fighting Xenon himself, and while they fight, Alexia watches in awe as she witnesses what she considers to be the ideal swordplay. One that's not built off of natural talent, but rather one that's built from hard work and determination. One that's ordinary, but powerful nonetheless. It's a sword style that she always dreamed of when she was younger, but then lost her way after people started to compare her to her sister. It's also in this moment that Alexia begins to understand that Iris was actually being genuine when she said she liked her fencing style, and it's possible that she saw in Alexia what Alexia now sees in Shadow. After Shadow defeats Xenon and blows up half the city, Alexia is left there awe-inspired and with a new resolve to reach her early childhood goals of mastering this ordinary fencing style that Shadow displayed. She's found a new purpose in fighting, not just in this new goal of hers, but also with the newfound knowledge of the cult and Shadow Garden. She wishes to know more about Shadow and his goals, as well as what dangers the cult could pose to the kingdom. After this, she begins her training, not only in the ways of swordplay, but also studies many topics in order to strengthen her knowledge of the world so that she will no longer be left in the dark about the dealings that happen in the shadows. Throughout the rest of the series, she's shown growing steadily in all sorts of ways. She expresses genuine interest in Sid, and gets brutally shot down. She patches up her relationship with her sister and no longer harbors any more jealousy towards her. She forms new alliances with people in order to further her progress of learning more about the cult and Shadow Garden. She's even shown being more caring and genuinely kind towards others. She seems to actually care about the well-being of her kingdom and its citizens. She also shows tremendous progress in her combat abilities, impressing Rose during their brief scuffle during the Bushin Festival arc. Now, she still hasn't really defeated any notable fighters, but she's clashed with many and been able to surprise a few of them with her abilities. And not because of brute strength or magical ability, but rather with pure, refined skill of swordsmanship. She's shown growth in almost every single aspect of her character. She used to be a self-loathing princess that felt terrified by the expectations of others, and unable to share her concerns and feelings with pretty much anybody, forcing herself to mask her true thoughts under multiple layers of peculiar personality traits. But now she's confident in her process to become stronger and more knowledgeable. She recognizes her own flaws and no longer accepts them for what they are, but instead tries to make them strengths. She's mastering an ordinary fencing style to the point where others are incredibly impressed by how far she's come. She's learned more about politics than even her sister. She has incredible intuition and is now much better at reading situations since she's able to think clearer without the distractions of her previously deteriorating mental state. She's an incredible character that you no longer pity, but you can now root for. You might find yourself wanting her to get stronger every time she fights, and finally prove that hard work can compete with natural talent. You might even want her to prove that with methodical effort, anybody can amount to something. To me, she's anything but ordinary. She's an extraordinary character with incredibly relatable flaws and a redemption that should inspire anyone to try harder. Now, there's tons more that I could say about Alexia, but I'm gonna go ahead and leave it here for now. Of course, there are probably tons of things that I've missed or didn't mention in this video, so if you have anything that you want to add about Alexia, feel free to do so in the comments below. I loved reading a lot of the comments on my last video about Sid and Iris and seeing all of the different perspectives that people had, so I hope to see more this time too. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Peace.